Clove. That smell in the dentist's chair right before the needle goes in, that is clove. The active compound is called eugenol, still listed in modern dental formularies as a legitimate analgesic. One small bottle costs under $1 at most grocery stores. Cherokee communities were using this same compound for oral pain as far back as 1722. So here is the question nobody seems to want to answer. If professional dentistry quietly kept this remedy for itself all along, why did the rest of us stop knowing it existed? Here is what makes this particular story hard to let go of. Cherokee communities in the southern Appalachians were not improvising. They were not guessing. Generations of careful plant knowledge passed through community practice, through family remedy traditions, through the kind of accumulated observation that takes centuries to build, had produced something that worked. Something so effective that when European settlers arrived in those same mountain regions, they were the ones learning from Cherokee healers, not the other way around. That date, 1722, is not a minor footnote. That is the earliest well-documented European account of witnessing Cherokee plant methods for oral pain. And the plant at the center of those early accounts was not obscure. It was not some rare bark found only in hidden valleys. The compound they were working with, eugenol, is sitting in grocery stores right now, labeled oil of cloves, mostly ignored, mostly unrecognized for what it actually does. Stay with me, because there is something else in this story that the basic history does not explain. In the 1940s, a researcher was moving through western North Carolina with a field notebook. He was documenting Cherokee plant use, the kind of work that was barely still being done before those traditions were either lost entirely or absorbed into academic storage where nobody would look at them. He recorded dozens of plants, dozens of applications, but one entry appears 3 times in that notebook. He circled it, underlined it in one place, and the plant he kept returning to was in the same eugenol family as commercial clove oil. What did he see that made him keep going back to the same name? I will get to that. But first, the mechanism, because this part is essential. Here is the thing about clove oil that changes how you understand this entire story. Eugenol does not simply cover pain the way aspirin might. It does not dull a signal after it has already traveled. It blocks the signal at the nerve site before it can move. That distinction matters more than it sounds. That is exactly why dentists still use eugenol-based compounds before injections. Not because of tradition, not because of habit, because it works at the source. And this is not fringe herbalism. Eugenol appears in the United States Pharmacopoeia. It has been cited in dental literature for decades as both analgesic and antimicrobial. It is one of the very few plant compounds that crossed directly from traditional use into professional medical practice and then stayed there, locked inside the professional world, while the household version quietly faded from common knowledge. This is where it changes. Cherokee communities did not simply chew cloves. Their oral care system was broader than that. It involved multiple clove-adjacent plants, certain native analgesic barks, rinse methods, and poultice applications developed across generations of practical use in the southern Appalachians. It was systematic. It was consistent. Early American settlers along the frontier did not bring this knowledge with them. They found it already working, and they adopted it. It was not folk mythology. It was applied plant science at the community level, long before that phrase existed. And then came 1830. The Indian Removal Act did not only displace Cherokee people from their homelands, it severed the transmission lines. The ongoing living transfer of botanical knowledge between Cherokee communities and the broader Appalachian population, a transfer that had been happening naturally for generations, was broken. Not cleanly, not all at once, but structurally interrupted. The knowledge that should have kept moving outward into American household practice, into regional remedy traditions, into the kind of information that gets passed down on the inside cover of a family Bible, it stopped traveling. By the late 1800s, the dental profession was formalizing fast. Licensing laws, standardized instruments, regulated materials, the construction of a professional boundary around oral care, a boundary that was not entirely wrong, but that carried a very specific side effect. Clove oil did not disappear from dental practice. It went deeper in. Eugenol-based compounds became core to the professional toolkit. Inside the office, indispensable. Outside the office, nobody was teaching it anymore. Nobody was stocking it prominently. Nobody was explaining what it actually was or why it worked. Not removed by law, removed by invisibility. And here is where that field notebook from the 1940s becomes important again. The researcher who circled the same plant name 3 times, his work appears in a 1952 University Botanical Journal, a documented, credible, peer-linked publication. And then his name disappears from the published record entirely. No follow-up studies, no expanded findings, nothing. 1952 is not a random year. That is exactly when synthetic dental compounds were beginning to enter commercial production at scale. New materials, new professional supply chains, new economic incentives to move dental practice away from plant-based foundations and toward patentable, manufacturable alternatives. Why would a working researcher with documented findings, peer-published, active in the field, go completely silent at that exact moment? That question is not rhetorical. The answer is in the notebook. The notebook did not stay buried forever. A digitization project at a university botanical archive, one of those quiet academic preservation efforts that almost never makes news, pulled it back into accessible records sometime in the early 2000s. And when researchers working in ethnobotanical history finally got to those pages, what they found was not vague. It was not romantic or mystical or loosely interpreted. It was precise. Multiple entries. Clove-adjacent plant applications for oral pain. Specific notes on Cherokee community. Use in the western North Carolina mountain region. Observations recorded with the kind of detail that only comes from direct witness, not from secondhand accounts, not from colonial-era speculation, but from a researcher sitting inside a living tradition that was still, in the 1940s, barely holding on. And then there was the margin note. In his own handwriting, next to the third circled entry, the researcher had written, "Already known to dental supply industry, see Zoe formulations." Zoe, zinc oxide eugenol. If you have ever had a temporary filling placed, the kind a dentist puts in while you wait for a permanent crown, there is a strong chance it was made with a Zoe-based compound. It is still one of the most widely used materials in restorative dentistry. It has been standard since the early 20th century, and its active pain-blocking component is eugenol, the same molecule, the same mechanism, the same compound that Cherokee communities had been working with in the southern Appalachians long before the dental supply industry had a name for it. This is the part nobody tells you. The dentist's office and the Cherokee remedy were not operating in parallel universes. They were pointing at the same thing. One version got a patent, a supply chain, and a professional classification. The other got quietly removed from the public vocabulary, not because it stopped working, but because working quietly on a pantry shelf is not a business model. Here is the documented trail. James Mooney, working for the Bureau of American Ethnology in the late 1800s, compiled some of the most detailed ethnobotanical records of Cherokee plant use that exist in any public archive. His work was not fringe, it was published. It was cited. It sat in the Smithsonian's collections. Early Smithsonian plant surveys from the same period corroborate overlapping plant applications across multiple indigenous communities in the Southeast. These records were not secret. They were not hidden in a vault. They were simply never connected, officially, publicly, widely, to the household wellness conversation happening in the same country at the same time. That is not an accident of history. That is a pattern. In 1938, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act restructured the way plant-based and herbal remedies could be labeled and sold in the United States. Clove oil was not banned, let that be clear. The plant was not made illegal. but any product making a specific pain relief claim now required pharmaceutical classification, clinical testing, and regulatory approval. Small herbal producers could not afford that process. Regional apothecaries stopped making direct claims. Home remedy booklets softened their language. The word analgesic disappeared from the clove oil label and was replaced by nothing, just a bottle of oil with a botanical name that most people no longer recognized. They did not bury the plant. They buried the permission to talk about what it did. And so it sat, for decades, on the lower shelves of pharmacy aisles, occasionally in the spice section of grocery stores, sometimes tucked next to the essential oils in health food shops, unlabeled in any useful way, unconnected to its own history, available, still available, right now to anyone who happens to know what they are looking at. Which brings this back to you. One small bottle of clove oil. Most pharmacies stock it. Most grocery stores carry it. The price has not changed much, under $1 in many places, a few dollars at most anywhere else. The compound inside that bottle is the same compound professional dentistry has been using in clinical settings for over a century. It is not a cure. It is not a treatment plan. It is not a replacement for professional dental care, but as a practical household tool for minor oral discomfort, the kind of minor flare-up that happens on a Sunday night when no office is open. It is exactly the kind of thing your great-grandmother knew, and your insurance company has no interest in you rediscovering. This is not about rejecting modern medicine. This is about recovering something that should have remained ordinary household literacy and instead got quietly reclassified as someone else's professional territory. Think about the full shape of this now. Cherokee communities, systematic, generational, community-tested plant knowledge. 200 years of documented oral care practice built around a compound that works. That same compound locked inside dental offices by the early 20th century. A researcher who documented the connection in 1952 and then vanished from the published record. A regulatory shift that same decade that removed the language without removing the plant. And a small brown bottle sitting on a shelf in your nearest grocery store right now, waiting for someone to actually read what is in it. Still available, still the same molecule, still under $1. You are not the person who walks past that bottle anymore. Cherokee plant knowledge was not mystical. It was not magic. It was not the product of a people who were somehow separate from the real world. It was documented, practical, community-embedded science, the kind of accumulated wisdom that gets built when a community pays close attention to the natural world for long enough. They were not ahead of their time. We just fell behind. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever used clove oil for tooth pain, or did someone in your family keep a remedy like this in the house? Tell me in the comments below, because I think more people have this in their background than realize it. And next time, there is a bark. A specific bark that Cherokee healers used for fever reduction, documented across multiple ethnobotanical records, that eventually ended up at the center of a modern pharmaceutical patent application. The company involved never mentioned where the foundational knowledge came from. That story is even bigger than this one.